The light at the corner of Meridian and 5th had been broken for 3 days. Nobody reported it. That was the kind of intersection it was. Cars ran it on instinct, pedestrians looked twice and crossed anyway, and the city moved around the problem the way a river moves around a stone. It was past 6 in the evening when the boy noticed the man. He was standing at the edge of the curb with one hand on the top of his cane, and the other holding the strap of a leather briefcase that probably cost more than the boy's mother had made in a year. He was wearing a gray coat, the kind with the stitching on the lapels. He was tall, his shoes were shined, and he was up to walk directly into the path of a delivery truck doing 40 in a 30 zone, because the signal he was waiting for had been broken since Tuesday, and nobody had told him. The boy's name was Tobias. He was 9 years old. He had been sleeping in the utility corridor behind the dry cleaners on Meridian for 11 days, and before that in the back seat of a car that a man named Dennis had eventually driven away with everything Tobias owned still inside it. Tobias was small for his age. He was wearing a gray hoodie with a bleach stain on the left sleeve and sneakers that were one size too large, because that was what the lady at the church pantry had in his size, which wasn't actually his size. He was eating a granola bar, the kind with chocolate chips, the only kind worth eating, when he saw the man step off the curb. He didn't think. That's the thing about being 9. You don't have enough years yet to have learned all the reasons not to. He ran. He grabbed the man's sleeve with both hands and pulled. The truck horn blew a second later, loud and long, and the driver leaned out the window and shouted something that dissolved before it reached them. Tobias stumbled backward onto the sidewalk. The man came with him. The briefcase hit the ground and the latch popped, and 3 manila folders slid out onto the concrete. There was a moment of absolute stillness. Then the man said very quietly, "What happened?" "Truck," Tobias said. He was breathing hard. "The light's broken. You couldn't have known." The man stood very still. He had gray hair and a face that was the kind of lined and certain face that belonged to someone who had spent decades making decisions and living with them. He was holding his cane in a white-knuckled grip. His sunglasses had gone slightly crooked. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No, sir. Are you a child?" Tobias looked down at himself. "Yes, sir." The man reached up with one hand and straightened his glasses. He said nothing for a long moment. Below them, the folders had fanned out across the sidewalk, and the wind was doing something ambitious to the pages. Tobias crouched and gathered them up, without being asked, pressing the edges together the way he'd seen people do with newspapers, and set them back into the briefcase and pressed the latch closed. "Thank you," the man said. "You're welcome. How old are you?" 9. "Where are your parents?" Tobias considered the question. It was the kind of question that required a short answer or a very long one, and there was no middle ground. "I don't have any right now," he said. The man's expression didn't change exactly, but something shifted in it. "Right now," he repeated. "My mom's in the hospital, in Denton. That's in Texas. I know where Denton is." The man bent and picked up his briefcase. He stood straight again, cane in his right hand, briefcase in his left. "What are you doing in Chicago?" "I came with her boyfriend. He was supposed to bring me back, and he didn't." "No, sir." The man was quiet for a moment. The intersection behind them had resumed its businesses. Cars, pigeons, a woman walking a dog the size of a footstool. The broken signal blinked amber at nobody. "My name is Elliot Marsh," the man said. "I'm going to ask you one more question, and I'd like an honest answer." "Okay. Do you have somewhere to sleep tonight?" Tobias thought about the utility corridor. The way the heating duct ran along the ceiling and made a sound like breathing. The way it smelled like chemicals and cardboard. "Not really," he said. Elliot Marsh was 61 years old. He had been a corporate attorney for 33 years. He had argued cases in front of judges who had since retired and died and had streets named after them. He had 2 daughters, both grown. Both live in cities that weren't Chicago. He had been blind for 4 years, since a degenerative condition that his doctor had told him about in careful, rehearsed language in an office that smelled like carpet cleaner. He had sold his car. He had learned to use a cane. He had refused, systematically and completely, to change anything else about his life, which his daughters called stubbornness and which he called adaptation. He had not planned for this. "Come with me," he said. Tobias did not move. He had been told, in the 11 days since Dennis left, by exactly 2 adults who seemed to mean well, that everything was going to be fine. He had learned to measure adults not by what they said, but by what they did in the 5 seconds after they said it. He watched Elliot Marsh reach into his breast pocket and take out a card and hold it out in a direction that was almost but not quite correct. Tobias took the card. It said Elliot Marsh, attorney at law, Marsh & Corrigan LLP, and then an address on Michigan Avenue, and then a phone number. "That's where I live," Elliot said. "Above the office, 12 floors up. There's a second bedroom that nobody uses and a kitchen with a refrigerator that has more food in it than I can eat alone." "Why?" Tobias asked. Why what? Why are you doing this? Elliot considered the question with the same seriousness he gave every question. Because you saved my life, he said, and because it's 6:30 in the evening and the temperature is dropping. And because you said your mother is in a hospital and you're 9 years old and standing on a street corner in Chicago with a bleach stain on your sleeve. He paused. Is that enough? Tobias looked at the card. He looked at the man. He thought about the utility corridor. Yes, sir, he said. The building on Michigan Avenue had a doorman named Carl, who did not visibly react to the sight of Elliot Marsh arriving with a 9-year-old who smelled like dry cleaning chemicals and hadn't had a proper shower in 11 days. Carl simply said good evening and held the door. Good evening, Carl, Elliot said. This is Tobias. He'll be staying for a while. Of course, Mr. Marsh, Carl said. He looked at Tobias and said, Welcome. Tobias said thank you, and meant it more than he had meant it for anything in a while. The elevator was wood-paneled and the apartment was on the 12th floor, and it was the kind of apartment that Tobias had seen in movies but had not understood were real. The ceilings were high. The bookshelves went all the way up. There was a kitchen with a long counter and bar stools, and the refrigerator was, in fact, full. The bathroom is the second door on the left, Elliot said. Towels are in the cabinet under the sink. Take as long as you need. Tobias stood in the center of the living room and did not move. What's wrong? Elliot asked. Nothing, Tobias said. It's just a lot, I know. Elliot set his briefcase down on the counter and opened the refrigerator without apparent difficulty. He knew where things were. There's leftover soup, chicken. My housekeeper makes it on Mondays, and it's always better by Wednesday. What day is it? Wednesday. Tobias thought that this might be the first lucky thing that had happened to him in a while. He showered until the hot water ran cold, which took longer than it ever had in any apartment he'd lived in before. He put his clothes back on because he had no others, and when he came out, Elliot had set a bowl of soup on the counter and a glass of milk beside it and a plate with crackers on it. There was also a folded gray sweatshirt on the bar stool. My younger daughter left that, Elliot said. He was sitting on the other side of the counter with a glass of something amber, not looking at Tobias in the way blind people didn't look, which Tobias had started to understand was its own different kind of attention. She's 27. It might be large on you, but it's clean. Tobias picked up the sweatshirt. It was soft in the way that expensive things were soft. He put it on. It came down past his hips. What's her name? Simone. Does she know I'm here? Not yet. Elliot took a drink. She will when I call her. I'll call her tonight. Will she be upset? Simone is almost never upset, Elliot said. She'll want to know your shoe size and she'll send something by Thursday. Tobias ate the soup. It was very good soup. He ate all of it and then held the bowl and didn't ask for more because he wasn't sure yet about the rules. There's more, Elliot said. How did you know? Because you're 9 and you've been on the street for 11 days and you're holding an empty bowl. He paused. Also, you went quiet in a way that meant you wanted something but weren't going to ask. Tobias looked at him. How do you know it's been 11 days? You told me. Your mother went to the hospital and the man who was supposed to bring you back didn't. I'm an attorney. I do the math. He stood, took the bowl, refilled it from the pot on the stove without spillage or hesitation. He set it back down with a small, satisfied accuracy. How long have you been blind? Tobias asked. He wasn't sure if that was rude. His mother had told him that some questions were rude, but she'd also told him that not asking questions was how you stayed ignorant, and he was working out where the line was. Elliot didn't seem offended. 4 years, he said. Is it getting better? No, it doesn't do that. Does it get easier? Elliot was quiet for a moment. Different, he said. Not easier, different. Tobias considered this. He thought it was probably the most honest answer an adult had given him in a long time, and he decided then that Elliot Marsh was someone he could trust in the way that you trusted certain things. Not completely, not yet, but enough to stay. 3 things happened in the first week. The first was that Elliot called his paralegal, a woman named Denise, who had been with the firm for 19 years, and who handled everything Elliot could not do himself, which was now a different list than it had been 4 years ago. Denise made 3 phone calls. By the end of the first day, she had located Tobias's mother, whose name was Sandra, who was in Baylor, Scott and White in Denton with a kidney infection that had turned serious faster than anyone had expected. Sandra was improving. She knew where Tobias was. She had cried, which Denise relayed to Elliot in her usual careful way. The second was that Simone Marsh arrived on Thursday morning with a bag from Target that contained 2 pairs of jeans, 4 shirts, a package of socks, sneakers in the right size, and a hoodie that was not gray and did not have a bleach stain. She also brought a book, a thick one with a dragon on the cover, and a travel-sized chess set because she said everyone should know chess. Simone was tall like her father, with her hair pulled back and her coat slightly crooked. and a directness that was so similar to Elliot's that Tobias recognized it immediately. She looked at Tobias for a long moment in the way adults looked at children when they were making a decision about them. Then she said, "Do you like hot chocolate?" "Yes," Tobias said. "Good. I brought the good kind, not the packets." She set the bag on the counter and handed him the chess set. "Do you know how to play?" "A little. Then I'll teach you the rest." She looked at her father. "You look tired." "I'm fine," Elliot said. "You're tired." She said it, the way daughters say things they've been saying for years. "Did you eat this morning?" Tobias made eggs. She looked at Tobias. "You cook?" "My mom taught me a few things. What else can you make?" "Toast. Oatmeal. Grilled cheese if there's butter." "There's always butter in this apartment," Simone said. She looked at her father again with an expression that Tobias couldn't fully read. Something layered, something that was love and worry and something older underneath both. "Dad, I'm fine," he said again. "I know," she said. She didn't argue it further. Instead, she made hot chocolate from a tin she'd brought, real cocoa and warm milk on the stove, and set 3 cups on the counter, and they sat together in the tall apartment on Michigan Avenue while the wind did what Chicago wind did in October. And it was the first time in 11 days that Tobias felt the particular specific warmth of not being alone. The third thing that happened in the first week was that Elliot Marsh was followed. Tobias noticed first because he noticed things that adults often didn't bother to notice anymore, which was a skill he had developed by necessity. It was the same man twice. Thursday at the coffee shop on the corner where Elliot went every morning at 7:45, and then Friday outside the building. When they returned from what Elliot called the walk, which was a route Elliot took every morning and which Tobias had begun accompanying him on without either of them formally deciding this. The man was in his 50s. He had a dark jacket and the kind of stillness that wasn't comfortable, the kind that was waiting. On Friday evening, Tobias told Elliot about him. Elliot was quiet for a long time, long enough that Tobias wondered if he'd said something wrong. "Describe him," Elliot said. Tobias described him. Elliot set down the pen he'd been holding and folded his hands on the desk in front of him. "Does he know you've seen him?" "I don't think so." "Good." Elliot said nothing else for a moment. "His name is probably Harlan Voss. He's a partner at a firm that has been trying to acquire mine for 14 months. "Why is he following you?" "Because we're going to court in 2 weeks, and the case isn't going the way he'd like." Elliot was very still. "There's something in the files, Tobias. Harlan knows I have it. He doesn't know if I've found it yet." "Have you?" Elliot looked in Tobias's direction in that way that meant he was listening to where Tobias was, reading the room the way he read everything now. "Yes," he said. 2 days ago." "Is that why he's watching you?" "That's why he's watching me." "What does he want to do?" "I think he wants to know if I'm going to use it, and possibly to do something about it if I am." "Are you going to use it?" "Yes," Elliot said. "I am." He said it without drama, the way he said most things, like a fact. "What should I do if I see him again?" Tobias asked. "Remember as much as you can. The time, what he's wearing, whether he has anyone with him. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." "Don't approach him. Don't let him know you're watching." "Okay," Elliot nodded once. "You're a perceptive child. My mom says I notice too much." "Your mother is wrong about that," Elliot said. "In my experience, people don't notice nearly enough." The man appeared again on Monday and Tuesday. On Wednesday, he was not alone. There was a woman with him, younger, in a blue coat, and she stood near the entrance to the building, while the man stood at the corner. Tobias watched them from the window of the apartment, noting the time, the clothes, the angle. He told Elliot that evening. Elliot called someone named Ronald, who he introduced as a retired detective, who came over Thursday morning and listened to Tobias describe both figures in the precise, careful way Elliot had taught him. Start with height, then build down, clothes last. Eyes on the hands, because hands tell you what people are planning to do next. Ronald asked him 3 questions and wrote things in a small notebook. He and Elliot spoke in the kitchen for 20 minutes, while Tobias ate breakfast and pretended not to listen, which meant he heard most of it. The case was about a merger. The files Elliot had contained internal communications that showed Harlan Voss and 2 other partners had signed off on projections they knew were false. People had lost money. Real money. The kind that changed lives going the wrong direction. Elliot had been hired by a group of those people, and in 2 weeks he was going to walk into a courtroom and present what he'd found. That was what the watching was about. On Friday evening, Simone came again. She didn't say she was worried. She said she wanted to see how the chess lessons were going, and she spent 2 hours teaching Tobias how to use the knight, which she said most beginners neglected. Then she and Elliot had a conversation in low voices in the kitchen that ended with Simone's voice going in the way voices went when someone was scared and trying not to show it. Tobias sat in the living room with the chess set, and moved pieces around the board. and thought. He thought about Sandra in Denton, who was getting better. Denise checked every 2 days and reported progress in ways that Tobias had learned to translate from adult careful to real. Improving steadily meant good, stable meant no worse. Encouraged meant the doctors were starting to sound like people instead of doctors. He thought about Elliot, who woke at 5:30 every morning and made coffee in the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had memorized the exact position of every object and who moved through the dark apartment like water through a channel, not fighting the current, just finding the path. He thought about what it meant to be watched. He had been watched before, in a different way, the kind of watching that meant someone was deciding whether you were worth their trouble. This was a different kind. This was the kind that meant someone was afraid. People who were afraid did things. That was the part that worried him. The thing happened on a Tuesday night, 10 days before the trial. Elliot had gone to the office late to meet with his co-counsel, a woman named Patricia who was handling the financial documentation, and who apparently kept hours that defied biological sense. He had taken a car service, as he did when Tobias wasn't with him, and he was supposed to be back by 9. By 9:15, he wasn't back. By 9:40, Tobias called Denise, whose number Elliot had written in large print on a card and taped inside the kitchen cabinet, and told Tobias to call if anything felt wrong. He had not told Tobias what counted as wrong. Tobias made his own calculation. Denise answered on the second ring. She listened. She said she would call the car service. She called back in 4 minutes and said the driver reported dropping Elliot at the office at 7, but the office said he'd left at 8:30, and the car service had no record of a pickup after that. He might have walked, Denise said, but she said it in the voice of someone who didn't believe it. He doesn't walk alone at night anymore, Tobias said. He told me. A pause. I'm going to call Ronald, she said. Stay where you are. Lock the door. Tobias locked the door. He sat on the couch and held the card with Denise's number and did not turn the television on because he needed to be able to hear. His hands were very still. He had learned a long time ago that when things went bad, shaking didn't help. And still hands were better than shaking hands, because still hands could do things. He thought about what he knew. He knew the rough route from the office to the apartment. He had walked it 16 times with Elliot over the past 2 weeks. He knew where the broken lights was, a different one now, on Adams, near the parking structure, and he knew where the alley cut between the building and the parking structure, and came out on the other side 2 blocks closer to Michigan. He knew that Elliot, if he had decided to walk, would have taken the direct route. The route with the most people on it. Elliot did not take alleys. Tobias knew this. But someone who wanted to move Elliot from one place to another without witnesses might choose the alley. His phone buzzed. It was Denise. Ronald is 10 minutes out. Police are being called. Stay inside. He looked at the message for a long time. He was 9 years old. He put on his shoes. The alley between the Callaway building and the parking structure on Adams was 40 feet long and lit by a single fixture above a service door that cast more shadow than light. Tobias approached it from the south end and stopped at the corner and looked. There were 3 people. Elliot was one of them. He was standing very straight in the way he stood when he was masking something, cane in hand, briefcase gone. The man in the dark jacket, Harlan Voss's man, was to his left. There was another man Tobias hadn't seen before, taller, near the far wall. They were talking, but Tobias was too far to hear, not arguing, just talking in that low, pressured way that meant someone was being told what to do, and the telling was almost over. He looked around. There was a restaurant on the north end, the kitchen entrance, propped open, steam coming out, someone in white near the door smoking and looking at a phone. He thought very fast. He walked directly to the person in white and said, "Excuse me, sir, I need help. There's something happening in the alley. Can you call the police?" The man looked up. He was young, 20s, with flour on his sleeve. He looked at Tobias and then at the alley. "What kind of something?" he said. "The kind where 2 men have an older man cornered, and I need someone bigger than me to come stand there so they know they've been seen." The young man looked at him for a long second. Then he pulled his phone out and said, "I'll call and I'll come," and Tobias said thank you, and they walked to the alley entrance together. The young man stepped into the alley and said loudly, "Hey, everything okay here?" Both men looked up. The one in the dark jacket looked at the young man and then at Tobias, and his face changed in the way faces changed when people realized the calculation had shifted. Elliot heard the voice. He turned his head toward the entrance, toward the sound. "Tobias," he said, not a question. "Yes, sir," Tobias said. "I've got someone with me and the police are coming." The 2 men looked at each other. One of them said something low. Then they walked, not ran, walked, toward the far end of the alley and around the corner and were gone. The young man said something under his breath. Elliot walked toward the entrance with the cane, finding the ground in front of him in clean, certain strokes. When he reached Tobias, he stopped. He didn't say anything for a moment. He put his hand on Tobias's shoulder. That was all. Denise told me to stay aside, Tobias said. She was right, Elliot said. I know. You came anyway. Yes, sir. Elliot's hand stayed on his shoulder. He said very quietly, Don't do that again. Okay, Tobias said. He paused. I probably will, though. Elliot made a sound that was not quite a laugh. I know, he said. The police arrived 6 minutes later. Ronald arrived 2 minutes after that. Denise arrived 12 minutes after Ronald, in a coat over what appeared to be pajamas, and she looked at Tobias with an expression that combined relief and exasperation in equal and entirely understandable parts. The two men were identified. One of them, it turned out, was not employed by Voss at all, but by an insurance firm with a significant interest in the merger going through. The details of what followed were the kind of details that took months to fully resolve, the way legal things always did, but the important fact was that the case went forward. Elliot Marsh walked into court 11 days later and presented what he'd found. He won. Sandra was discharged from Baylor, Scott & White on a Thursday in November. Simone flew to Denton to meet her, which was Simone's idea, which she presented to Elliot as a simple logistical decision, and which Elliot received with the understanding that Simone made her logistical decisions with her whole heart. Tobias talked to his mother on the phone every other day during the last 3 weeks, calls that lasted 20 minutes and went the same way, every time. Sandra asking questions, Tobias answering them. Sandra going quiet in the middle of each call for a few seconds in the way people went quiet when they were putting a feeling somewhere. Is he good to you? Sandra asked the week before she was released. Yes, ma'am. He's really a good man. He's the most serious person I've ever met, Tobias said, which was true, and he taught me how to know which direction I'm facing when I come out of a building I've never been in before by counting steps from the door. And he has the best soup I've ever had in my life. Sandra was quiet for a moment. The soup is his housekeeper's, she said. She'd been told about the housekeeper. He knows it, Tobias said. He says acknowledging your resources is the foundation of competence. Another pause. That sounds like something a lawyer would say. He says a lot of things that sound like things a lawyer would say, Tobias said. I'm writing them down. On the day Sandra arrived in Chicago, because Denise had arranged everything, the train ticket, the car from the station. A hotel 3 blocks from Michigan Avenue paid for by Elliot with the same matter-of-fact efficiency he brought to everything. Tobias met her at the door of the apartment building and she held on to him for a long time without saying anything. He let her. She was thinner than he remembered. She had a look in her eyes that people had after they'd been frightened about their bodies, a kind of new carefulness, like they'd learned something about the machine they lived in. But she was upright and she was warm and she smelled like herself, which was the most important thing. Elliot met them in the lobby. He was wearing his gray coat. He was holding his cane, briefcase in the other hand, returning from the office in the early afternoon, which Tobias knew was early for him, but which had been happening more often in the last 2 weeks. Mrs. Aldrich, Elliot said. He held out his hand. Sandra looked at the hand, and then at Elliot, and then at Tobias. She shook his hand. Mr. Marsh, she said, Tobias has told me a great deal about you. He's told me a great deal about you, Elliot said. I understand you make very good eggs. Sandra looked at Tobias, who looked at the floor. He told me you taught him, Elliot said. I did, Sandra said. Her voice was doing something. He made them every morning for 3 weeks, Elliot said. They were consistently excellent. You did well. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Thank you, she said. And then lower. Thank you for keeping him safe. He kept himself safe, Elliot said. He kept me safe. I provided the eggs and the second bedroom. They stood in the lobby for a moment, the 3 of them, with Carl at the door pretending not to listen and doing a poor job of it. Will you come up? Elliot said. Margaret made soup yesterday. It's better today. Sandra looked at Tobias. Tobias looked at her. Yes, she said. We'll come up. What happened in the months that followed was the kind of thing that unfolds slowly enough that no single moment marks it. No ceremony, no announcement, just a series of ordinary days that accumulated into something different. Elliot's firm hired Sandra, once she was fully recovered, to work with Denise in client intake. It was Denise's idea. She had needed help for 3 years and had been asking for it, and she said Sandra was organized and careful and good with people who were frightened, which was most of their clients. Elliot agreed without deliberating, which was unusual for a man who deliberated about everything. They found an apartment 4 blocks from Michigan Avenue. Elliot knew the landlord. The rent was not what it should have been for 4 blocks from Michigan Avenue. Sandra tried to argue about this, and Elliot said, in the way that he ended arguments, that the landlord was doing him a favor, not her, and the matter was closed. Tobias started at the middle school in January. He was put in the accelerated program after a placement test that a teacher named Mr. Beaumont described as quietly remarkable, which was a phrase Tobias kept. He walked to school most mornings. On the mornings he didn't, he stopped at the coffee shop on the corner where Elliot went every day at 7:45, because Tobias had discovered that Elliot's order, black coffee, no sugar, the same cup every day, was less interesting than the conversation, which ranged from the day's cases to the nature of judicial precedent to the structural weaknesses of Tobias's opening chess moves, which Elliot had begun analyzing from description alone. "You lead with the pawn on the left every time," Elliot said one morning in February over coffee and a hot chocolate. "It feels safe," Tobias said. "Safe openings rarely lead to interesting games," Elliot said. "Try the king's knight, see what happens. What will happen? You'll be uncomfortable for the first 15 moves and then you'll understand something you didn't before." Tobias thought about this. "Is that how learning works in general?" "In my experience," Elliot said, "yes." On the last Saturday of February, Simone came and they played a tournament, all three of them, round robin, at the coffee table in the apartment with the bookshelves that still went all the way to the ceiling. Simone won the first game. Tobias won the second. Elliot won the third, which he did without appearing to try particularly hard, which Tobias found both impressive and annoying in equal measure. "You can see the board in your head?" Tobias asked. "I have seen this game before," Elliot said, "many times. I know where it goes. Does that make it less interesting?" Elliot considered the question with the full weight he gave every question. "No," he said. "Familiarity doesn't diminish something worth knowing. It deepens it." Tobias wrote that one down, too. That evening, Sandra made dinner, something that involved the good pot and took an hour and filled the apartment with the kind of smell that meant real food, the kind that required effort and attention. Simone set the table. Elliot opened a bottle of wine and poured 2 glasses and set a ginger ale on Tobias's left without asking, because he knew where Tobias sat. They ate at the long table under the high ceiling, with the city doing what the city did outside's windows, and at some point during the meal, Tobias looked at the 3 people around the table, the serious man in the gray coat who counted steps from doorways, and who had been walking toward a truck and was now walking away from it. The woman across from him, who had come back from the hospital full thinner and more careful, and who laughed now with a carefulness that hadn't been there before. The daughter in the crooked coat, who sent packages on Thursdays and taught chess, and arrived when she was worried, without saying she was worried. And he understood that this was what things could become if you grabbed a sleeve. He didn't say anything. He was 9 years old. He ate his dinner. Outside, the city moved around its stones the way rivers always had, and the light at the corner of Meridian and Fifth had finally been fixed, and the evening was clear, and the temperature was not dropping.